The Forgotten Village. Chapter 1. The Letter, Extended and Immersive. The rain had been falling since morning. Not the kind of rain that rushes down in violent torrents, but a steady, cold drizzle that soaks into your skin and lingers in your bones. Outside James Holloway's small apartment in London, the world had dimmed into shades of gray. Wet asphalt, fogged windows, and leafless trees rattling in the wind like brittle fingers. James sat at the kitchen table, half-finished coffee, steaming before him, the soft click of a wall clock marking each quiet second. The stack of unopened mail sat beside him, an assortment of junk, bills, and the usual lifeless correspondence that populated a writer's day. He lived alone. Had done so for years. Friends had come and gone, relationships even more fleeting. But solitude suited James. His life was words, books, drafts, manuscripts, horror novels mostly. The darker, slower kind, the kind that crept into the reader's mind and made them uneasy hours after they'd put the book down. That morning, however, would bring a kind of story James wasn't prepared to write, because in that pile of mail was an envelope that didn't belong. It was yellowed at the edges, thick and textured, with no postmark or return address. The name on the front was written in a careful, old-fashioned script. James Holloway. He turned it over. The flap was sealed with a hardened glob of dark red wax, stamped with a symbol he didn't recognize, something like a tree, or maybe a twisted figure. It was difficult to make out. His fingers trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Inside was a single piece of parchment. Real parchment. Thick, fibrous, with rough edges. The words typed onto it were in fading ink. To James Holloway, last of. The line, return to Dunbridge. The gate is stirring. The land remembers. They are waiting for you. He read it once. Then again. Dunbridge? The name didn't trigger any clear memory, but something inside him, some quiet, buried instinct, shivered at the word. It felt familiar, like a childhood place long forgotten or a half-remembered nightmare. He stood grabbing his laptop. A quick search for Dunbridge turned up very little. There was a Dunbridge station in Hampshire, but no village by that name. No articles, no population census. Nothing on modern maps. Just one obscure mention on a long-abandoned genealogy forum. My great-grandfather disappeared in 1902 while traveling through the Dunbridge hamlet. No one could find it after. James leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. He thought of his parents, both dead in a car crash when he was 5. He'd grown up in foster care, his family history a mystery. No one had ever spoken of bloodlines or heritage, but the letter felt deliberate, and something about it called to him, not just as a writer looking for a story, but as someone who was being summoned. The next morning, James booked a one-way ticket to England's countryside. He packed light, just a duffel bag, a notebook, and the letter, folded neatly into his coat pocket. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. Not that there was anyone to tell. The train ride out of London was uneventful, but as the landscape grew more rural, James felt the weight of the modern world fall away. Cell service faded, roads thinned, villages became fewer and farther between. By evening, he had rented a car and followed the vague instructions he'd scribbled from the old forum. Turn left at the rusted windmill. Continue past the broken stone bridge. Look for the crooked tree with no leaves. Hours passed in silence. The GPS failed. No other cars, no signs, just the soft crunch of tires on gravel and the deepening shadows between the trees. Eventually, as dusk gave way to darkness, he saw it, an old weather-beaten sign barely clinging to its post. Dunbridge, no population count. No slogan, just the name. James parked the car. Stepped out. The air was still. Too still. The kind of stillness that made your ears ring from the absence of noise. Ahead, a stone gate arched over a narrow path, choked with vines and moss. Two crumbling pillars stood like silent sentinels. He hesitated, then stepped forward. As he passed through, the air felt heavier, charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Behind him, the gate closed, but it made no sound. Chapter 2. The Road. To nowhere, extended and immersive. The silence was unnatural. James walked slowly, the crunch of gravel under his boots the only sound that marked his presence. The narrow path beyond the gate was framed by gnarled trees whose branches curled inwards as if trying to trap light. The overgrowth on either side was thick, wild, untouched for decades, maybe more. And then, something else. A low hum. Not mechanical. Not human. It vibrated through the ground, barely audible, like the land itself was murmuring beneath his feet. He kept walking. After a few minutes, the forest began to open. The path turned into a narrow, cobbled road, broken in places, and overtaken by moss. Stone cottages emerged from the gloom, their windows shuttered or broken, their chimneys cracked and lifeless. There were no street lamps, no telephone poles, no wires, no signs of life. But everything was intact. Too intact. Like the village had been preserved. James stopped in front of what must have once been a bakery. A faded wooden sign still swung above the door, though the lettering had worn away. He peered through the dirty glass and saw loaves of bread still sitting on the shelves, stone hard, molded, but unmistakably there. He stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. How could they still be here? How could anything still be here? And then came the smell. Not rot, not mildew, but something old. The scent of sealed tombs, of dry parchment, of stone crypts untouched by sunlight. He turned in a slow circle. Everything around him felt frozen, like time had paused at the edge of something terrible. At the end of the main street stood the church, its tall spire piercing the dark sky. The bell tower was crooked but intact. The front doors were slightly ajar, and beyond it, the fog. Not ordinary fog. It clung to the ground in thick, deliberate rolls. It pulsed gently, moving with breath-like rhythm, as though it were alive. James instinctively reached into his coat, his fingers brushing the letter again. Something moved. He turned sharply. Nothing. But in the upper window of the old general store, he thought he saw a face, pale, watching. Gone in a blink. His pulse quickened. No birds, no insects, not even wind, only the low, ever-present hum. He continued down the road. His footsteps now echoed differently, sharper, like he was walking through a tunnel. Each step seemed to stretch further, like the village distorted around him, folding space in ways that didn't belong in the natural world. Then, he reached the square. There, in the middle, was a well, old and dry with rusted iron grates bolted over the top. A black feather rested on the edge. James picked it up. It was warm and wet. Chapter 3. The Village That Waited, Extended and Immersive. A light flickered. James looked up. One of the cottages, slightly, apart from the others, had a hearth still burning. Orange light flickered through the windows, casting dancing shadows on the walls. For the first time, James felt something familiar. Something human. He approached cautiously, every instinct inside him tight with warning. The wooden door creaked, open at his touch. Inside, the warmth was immediate. The hearth blazed with orange coals. A copper kettle steamed gently over it. Dust floated through the air like ash, and yet the room felt lived in. The walls were lined with books. A small round table stood in the center, with 2 chairs pulled close. And on the table, another letter. James didn't want to touch it. He already knew it was for him, but he did. The handwriting was different this time. Sharper, cursive, but rushed. Written with urgency, perhaps even desperation. You have returned, but you are not safe here. They remember your name. Stay out of the mirrors. Do not listen when they call with your voice. James felt a chill run through him. His eyes moved slowly to the far wall, where a tall, cracked mirror leaned, partly covered by a tattered sheet. The part that was exposed showed only the flickering fire. A reflection. A room, yes, but not the one he stood in. It was darker, older, rotting. The fire was out. The walls bled black mold, and someone, a figure, stood in the far corner. James blinked, and the mirror showed only himself again, except his reflection wasn't moving. It stared at him, smiled slowly. James hadn't smiled. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Then the clock above the hearth chimed once, and again, and a third time. The fire dimmed, its warmth fleeing like breath in winter. From behind him, footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Soft thuds on the wooden floor. He turned. No one. He turned back to the mirror. His reflection was gone. Only an empty room stared back. End of chapter 3.